So, regarding healthcare, the ACA was supposed to be major reform. As you mentioned, it was, originally crafted by the Heritage Foundation and, of course, implemented by Mitt Romney in Massachusetts and turned out to be basically just a band-aid over a bullet hole. So, where do we go from here? Is there room to really improve the ACA, or do we have to move in a radically different direction? We already talked about Medicare for all. So, how do we push the narrative further towards that, I guess?
Well, it's easier for me as an outsider to just say this is a failed system. We've had a 60-year experiment in the private marketplace. We've got to patch something over for the next few years, probably. So I can't damn some of the people in Washington because they have those considerations. But this is ultimately a dysfunctional marketplace in healthcare, and we have to start over. And we have a clear model out there with the Canadian system, which will work and which a lot of the public would like if it is explained to them clearly. Mm-hmm. And in this regard, I think we can be as clear and strong as possible that what we have now is organized crime. It's a protection racket. Martin Luther King said the worst form of cruelty is to deny someone health care. Mm-hmm. A fourth of our seniors can't afford prescriptions. 50 million people can't get the health care. And we have a system that business people in Canada find as non-controversial as women voting. So we have the model out there, but most of the public doesn't know the successes of the Canadian system because of the struggle from a $3 trillion industry to damn that system, because if we were to implement it, we wouldn't have healthcare in the private marketplace. So I think it is time to be as bold as possible to clarify a different vision for the country. And I want to add, I think we need to always emphasize that this is, under our current system, it is the health insurance industry strangling American businesses. They are strangling small businesses as well as families. And that the freedom to choose your doctor and the freedom to choose your hospital is the freedom that Americans want, and to frame it in a little different way.
Yeah, people react pretty well to freedom. I like the way you say that about as non-controversial as women voting, because, as we all remember hearing that Medicare for all would never, ever happen, that's exactly what people said about women voters when that was a hot button contentious issue. But
right.
Moving on to, somebody said the difference between a liberal and a conservative and a liberal is 20 years once. So anyways.
Yeah. I want to come back to a previous point that you made.
Yeah, sure.
You were kind of inferring, if I might.
Go ahead.
I think most change in the country comes from the bottom up, not from the top down. When the people lead, the leaders will follow. And I take people back to the protests and writing and organizing against those who came up with the Constitution, because the Bill of Rights itself was a reaction from the public against the Constitution to expand it. And that was the abolitionist movement, the populist movement, the progressive movement, the women's movement, the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental movement, the anti-war movement, all of them from the grassroots. And if we're able to put the grassroots together strongly enough and clearly enough, then we're on the front pages. Then people are talking about our issues, and we get to frame them. Citizens United is as bad a decision as Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy versus Ferguson defined freedom and divided us by race. Citizens United called it freedom to put unlimited money into campaigns, and they're dividing us by social class and economic class. Both are poison to the body politic. and we'll have to fight extra hard to overcome them. We'll probably have to fight in the streets more so than in elections, but I think both are battlegrounds.
I co-sign that wholeheartedly. So according to your website, and of course we hear it from the guy who sits in the White House, the unemployment percentage looks pretty good, but it gives us, as you say, a false image of the economy as positive, failing to take into account people who have dropped out of the workforce, underemployed people, low wages, et cetera, et cetera. In the modern age, where efficiency, meaning automation and reduction in costs, specifically labor costs, is the goal, how do we address this issue? How do we move forward in a modern economy while pushing for workers' rights?
There's not going to be a silver bullet on this one. And this will be a little longer, slower answer. It is everything from pushing tax policy to invest in research and development, invest in a workforce from early childhood education to making college affordable or free at public colleges, all of which can be done. And most other advanced industrial societies have done that. Those are what our competitors are already doing. Sustainable energy is an area that's necessary for harmony with the planet. And we could be making more of the windmills and solar panels in the United States, as opposed to buying them from Europe and China. Those are the easy ones. But in terms of going further than that, I think a more adept workforce to deal with economic cycles, which are going to be inevitable where we have recessions and depressions. I think cooperatives provide us a possibility that's quite dynamic in being countercyclical, being democratic, being effective. And I bring up to my students, and there's longer range vision in talking to people. Let's say the cooperatives in Spain, Mondragon, sixth biggest business in Spain, democratically run. It's in 50 different countries, and it's completely democratic. And the divorce rate's lower there. People are active in their community. And if there's an economic downturn, instead of laying people off, everybody just takes a cut in pay and gives up some of their benefits, but people don't get laid off. So there's a range of things that we can do. And I know that's down the road because people don't talk about cooperatives very much, or a form of democracy in the workplace. I think there's great dynamism to that and great security to that, and it conserves dignity of workers. Notice I'm using the term conservative. It conserves that dignity. But since it's marginalized in political science textbooks and economics textbooks and sociology textbooks, people don't hear about some of those successful efforts in Europe, just as we don't hear about different forms of protecting families with childcare in Sweden or healthcare in Canada. A comparative method would be able to share that with people. And it's one of the blessings I get in teaching sociology, to be more focused with your question. Economic knowledge doubling every 4 years. We have to start to prepare our workforce by making sure that pregnant moms have good health care, that we have child care programs that are second to none, that are affordable, with trained people in child care, just as we have trained people teaching kindergarten. We're going to have to recognize that smaller classes is essential for economic security in the future. And our high school dropout rate is the wrong metric. People need at least 2 years of college to be viable in a workforce today, which means our dropout rate's close to 40%, which inevitably is going to lead to families that aren't secure, And we have the worst inequality we've had since 1928, and that's after the growth from the Great Recession. So we've done some things right. President Obama's moderate plans were blunted by Republican obstructionism and will have to be overcome with a grassroots movement that works inside the Democratic Party and critically outside the party. And as much as I love and respect unions, only 2% of South Carolina of the working people are in unions. So we've got a ways to go with that as well. Further, of the new jobs that are created, we don't get much data on how many of these jobs leave people in poverty. So the unemployment rate tends to be quite deceiving. We're not the only country that calculates it in a deceiving way, but we're not creating the good jobs here. And that's where the money from the national government has to go into research and development and sustainability. And we have to incentivize corporations to invest in research and development and production. If I might say one more thing on this, Matt, do we have another minute for me to elaborate?
Oh yeah, keep going.
This tax bill was essentially theft from the working class and the poor and invested in the rich and corporations. They got about 80% of the benefits from it. There were crumbs for the rest of us, and they could have invested in all of these other areas. But I want to focus for just a minute on corporate profits, because the Harvard Business Review in 2014 looked at what corporations were doing with their profits. 90% went into stock buybacks, which boosted the price of stock, or higher dividends for those who owned a lot of stock, or mergers and acquisitions, or higher pay for CEOs and management. Only 10% of corporate profits was going into production and research and development. Well, those are the areas where we're going to grow the productivity, where we'd have a chance for more Americans to be working. It could have been incentivized, but when the wealthiest 1% put 97% of the money into elections, it rigs the process so that we end up with a tax bill that could have done us some good, could have provided economic relief, could have provided dynamism, and instead was theft by the wealthy that we're going to be digging ourselves out of for a number of years if we don't overturn it. So it is a multifaceted strategy. I'm not saying much new. I realize that. I'm trying to frame it in a slightly different way. I mean, and part of this struggle is when people are working these jobs, we got to change the minimum wage to make it a living wage. I mean, this is an absolute disgrace. I want to borrow the language of Martin Luther King in 1968 and looking at, he said in regards to the sanitation workers in Memphis, that it's a crime in this wealthy nation for people to work for starvation wages. And if you calculate the cost of living, the minimum wage today is lower than it was in 1968. It's still a crime. So that some people who aren't going to be able to get the good jobs still should be able to have dignity and be able to support their families. And that's part of our struggle for jobs as well, I think.
So when they tell us that we need to funnel money to the wealthy so that they can create jobs, it's more like the con job creators. Am I right?
Yeah, well put. That's always their claim, that they're the job creators. Robert Reich does a nice job with this in his film Inequality for All, because it's a very comforting claim to the wealthy. And every time we've done trickle-down economics, it's created greater inequality, and the rich have gotten richer and the poor get poorer.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of discussion specifically with Chomsky and in the outlets like the Baffler, where they talk about how the wealthy, from the tech billionaires to wealthy heirs, are all trying to push this idea of themselves as just working people constantly doing jobs. I saw somebody I can't remember. Oh, Betsy DeVos's husband is listed as an entrepreneur and businessman, for sitting on a couple of boards. So the way that we classify work in this country is really just it's kind of messed up. So,
well, you put your finger on it, and this is not a story, but the inequality has accelerated under the Reagan era because of his version of trickle-down economics. Bush accelerated that, and it's been accelerated again by Trump, and it has been worsened by the Citizens United decision, where unlimited money comes into political campaigns, and it's seen as free speech. So all of this rigs the tax bills, the trade bills to protect the wealthy, and the inequality increases. So the anger with some of the working class played itself out against the establishment and the Republican Party. That dissent has been totally deceived by the con job from Trump. And the Sanders wing of the party is an awful lot stronger than it was 2 years ago. So we are seeing an insurgency unevenly gaining a lot of traction. But you're right, there are no easy answers on this, and always a claim from the wealthy that they are creating jobs and donating a lot of money. And paradoxically, the wealthy don't donate that much money, and they don't put much in the way of investments in jobs. They're investing overseas, or they're putting money in hedge funds that then invest the money overseas, whereas tax policy could target those investments through higher taxes in the United States. And I remind people that under Eisenhower, a conservative Republican, the taxes on the wealthiest 1% were 90%. Now they're 35%. They've gone down on corporations. It's just not enough money to put into the public sector for schools, for sustainable energy, and critically for infrastructure, which is necessary for growth in the future.
Yep. So they come into a community, drain a lake, give you a glass of water, and demand that they demand that you thank them for it. So if you have time to sit with us for a little bit longer, before we shift focus, I want to just go back to what you said about Citizens United, and talk about sort of the four horsemen of the Supreme Court apocalypse. It started with Buckley v. Vallejo, and then moved on to First National Bank of Boston versus Bellotti, and then on to Citizens United, and then again in McCutcheon versus the FEC. So what you have is the three-tiered issue of money is speech, corporations are people, and then unlimited speech / money is allowed to be funneled into campaigns, both by organizations, which was Citizens United, and individuals, which was McCutcheon. So yeah, I mean, we're looking at a situation where you've got 4 Supreme Court decisions that have completely tanked our political system, and it's quite possible that we need a whole amendment to the Constitution to discuss this. But if you have more time, can we shift to foreign policy for a little bit?
Yeah, glad to. Let me just make a comment. I appreciate your overview. I think you're spot on. I think the founding fathers, slave owners that they were, bankers that they were, would have cringed at what was happening today, because even they realized if any faction gets too much power and it goes unchecked, it threatens the entire republic. And that's what's going on. The power of big corporations and banks is not checked by the Supreme Court. It's not now checked by Congress. They own the mass media. So the fourth estate has been more neutralized, and it has created great dissension in the country. And I see the dissension getting worse before it gets better. The founding fathers wanted to divide power because they realized any one faction would distort the process. They didn't want a king, they didn't want an organized church, and they didn't want one powerful faction of money to dominate the system. And that's what we're facing right now.
That's my reading of the situation. I think Jefferson said that banks are more dangerous than standing armies. But yeah, let's move on to foreign policy.
Okay.
So, what is your stance on Israel and Palestine? You were there in '73. I think you said. I mean, I can't imagine that you'd be neutral on this issue.
No, I was there during the first Intifada, also doing human rights work in Jenin and in Gaza, and went back there in 2015 with a group called Sabeel to look at the situation on the ground. And what we have is modern day colonialism, and there's no way to dress it up, and it creates less security for the United States. It's not sustainable for Israel. It's very difficult to see when you're over there, painful. And if American citizens, Jewish American citizens, and rabbis were to visit the West Bank and Gaza, they would see it the same way. And it's clear to me, if they do not visit it, they do not understand the story well enough for us to create solidarity and democracy in the region.
Mm. Yeah, it's a very succinct way of putting it, I think. So, can't get away from talking about Russia. So, what are your thoughts regarding that? Is there something to the whole Russia hacked our system? Are we being hysterical? And did they cost us the election? And what do we do moving forward? I mean, if they did, then how do we address that?
You know, I think it's an issue among many. I think the 120 million that was allocated to protect our elections should be spent. I mean, I think there's a reason Trump isn't spending it. I don't think it was the difference in our election, but I think it happened just as the Russians used this strategy throughout Eastern Europe and put money into political parties. In France, just as the United States in the past and probably in the present is putting money into other elections. And when I was down in Nicaragua to monitor the election with the UN, the United States put money in to the Nicaraguan election through the National Endowment for Democracy. The CIA has been doing this stuff since it was founded. I guess the big election push for us was Italy in '48, where we had money sloshing around their election. So this is not new to great powers, even though Russia is no longer as great a power. I think they have involved themselves in elections because they want different policies in Europe, whether it's a weaker European Union or different strategies within NATO. I think that's a foreign policy concern. I think there's a lot that was going on in Ukraine that hasn't come to light of day, from what Manafort was doing to what the CIA was doing. So I think we're years away from that, just as we don't know really what was going on with 9/11 and what triggered the war throughout the Middle East. That investigation was as bad as the Warren Commission. So we've got a ways to go to sort things out. I'd love to sit on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I know that's a plum position, but that's part of what drove me back to graduate school, to have a better understanding of these things. I think Putin is a tyrant in Russia. There's not free elections there, but he's not the only tyrant around the world. And certainly we could deal with him, and it would be better to deal with him through trade. Trump was the wrong guy, since he was so close to so many actors in Russia. I think we'll let the Mueller investigation play itself out there. I think there's plenty, and I think there's a cover-up. I think Trump's a threat to the Republic in many ways, and a threat to the earth if he doesn't want to take climate change seriously. I see Putin as not afraid to be a thug to move into Crimea and do what he wanted to do. So I don't think that stabilizes the situation in Eastern Europe. But I think this is getting more play than other issues. because it looks like it may lead to an impeachment issue. So that's my first take on it.
I think that's pretty reasonable. There are connections, obviously, with his money laundering through real estate, et cetera. But whether there's collusion, that's yet to be proven by anything that I've seen. And of course, Trump would go through great lengths just to cover up the fact that he's been laundering money for a foreign country for years. So, I mean,
right.
Yeah, I guess
agree with you.
I guess at this point, it's just, we don't know yet, and they haven't.
I'd like to find out. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I was just going to say, if anybody knows, they haven't shown us. So,
Right. I'm waiting for the Mueller investigation to roll over more of the cards and I take it seriously. I think he's trying to do as good a job as he can do. I think it's a less politicized FBI than it was under a J. Edgar Hoover, but they're always politicized. And I think he's trying to work in a very rough situation. And certainly the House Intelligence Committee is not trying to investigate. And there's been certainly foot dragging in the Senate Intelligence Committee. So the checks and balances that would normally be there on a question of national security have broken down on partisan lines.
Okay. Well, I'd love to just spend an entire interview talking about that, but we do have to move on a little bit so some of us can get out of here at any point in the day. So a great philosopher once said, with great power comes great responsibility. However, from the banana wars to the war on terror, U.S. interventionism has caused more problems than it has solved. So what is the role of U.S. intervention? And as the preeminent global power, how do we balance our responsibility to world stability without causing more calamities like ISIS or supporting fascist dictatorships in the global south?
Or invading Libya and not putting it together afterward, leading from behind. Yeah. Well, I guess I came of age taking a good hard look at Vietnam. So I'm very skeptical of foreign interventions. We heard nothing but lies to get us into Iraq. Afghanistan continues. It's 15, 16 years of war. We still have no strategy. We hardly hear what's going on. This is right out of Orwell's Permanent War. The military-industrial complex is larger. We've put more money into military spending with the national budget. We've got our hands full. I would submit that, as great conservative Edmund Burke said, that a conservative is cautious in the spilling of blood. And our empire has ceased being cautious a long time ago. I don't see this necessarily as a liberal conservative issue. I see it as common sense and caution. And as people talk more to veterans of these wars and see what they are thinking, listen to them, feel their anger, know that they were betrayed as to why we sent them to war, we would be much more cautious. As Americans start to see the price of putting their bodies and minds back together after fighting in these wars, we tend to be more cautious. As we look more clearly at the interventions that we've had with these wars, we tend to be more cautious. It's always tough to know it at a distance because I'm not getting top secret clearances as to some of the issues on the ground, but my tendency is to be very cautious, to have the strongest military on earth, but to use it as judiciously as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to know what's going on behind the scenes. Democracy Now! Had that great clip with General Wes Clark, where he talked about how there was a plan right after 9/11 to invade Iraq, and then subsequently 6 other countries. And if you look at the list, with the exception of, and I can't remember which one, there's like one trade out, but the list is completely identical to the list of countries we're at war with currently. So yeah, I mean, it's it's pretty clear that this isn't just happening naturally and organically as problems arise. This is a decisive strategy. So yeah, it's a tough question to balance, though. All right, so wrapping up, change. Everyone wants it. Obama ran on it. Trump ran on it. Both of them, let's just say they haven't delivered. The system is, if anything, more entrenched than it was before. How will you, as a representative from South Carolina, work to change the system instead of giving us the same old business-friendly, surface-level reforms of past candidates?
You can't take any of their money. When Obama took $1.2 billion to get elected, he became captured by them because he was not the same guy after he took the money that he was before. And he made a number of mistakes when he was in office by not strengthening a progressive wing of the Democratic Party, but leaving that aside. People need to have something that they're willing to fight for. We need to clarify a new message that actually inspires people. We do the organizing outside of the Democratic Party and try to work with progressives that have always been inside of the party so that they can have greater say-so, and we can start to nominate and get elected candidates that are speaking more boldly for change. We've seen this in our past, and again, I come back to grassroots organizing. I feel that it's my role as a teacher, it's public sociology, that you organize to run and run to organize, so that we are calling for a day of prayer and fasting at the steps of the State House on behalf of children next April, on the date that Martin Luther King was assassinated, to clarify what King was saying in 1968 as a way of re-engaging the grassroots in the United States. Some of this is going to be done for the 50th anniversary. I submit we all involve ourselves in that and make good notes as to how we can build that grassroots movement to clarify those issues, to force them on the national agenda so that we can elect people that are saying those things, which will be hard to do, and send shockwaves through the political system that we mean business, that these issues are real, that we aren't going to tolerate 1 out of 5 kids living in poverty. We aren't going to have 50 million people food insecure. We aren't going to have 60 million people who don't have adequate health care. We aren't going to tolerate a fourth of our seniors not being able to pay for their prescriptions. We aren't going to have a fourth of our rivers so polluted that the water isn't safe. That we demand rights for kids so that kids who didn't pick their parents, their communities, their schools, or their country, our kids actually have rights. I think it's our legacy. It is our fate to finish the civil rights movement. We have to engage it on the ground outside of politics as well as inside of politics. Jefferson said the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. He didn't trust any government. He figured governments would be abusive. So did most of the founding fathers. I think that those who formed the nation pledged their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor to form America. That's what's needed to reform America. And I honestly believe that if we engage in the struggle and recognize e pluribus unum, out of many, we are one, we can galvanize the country in a different way. But it's going to take a commitment that's different than we've done in the past. Everyone has to get outside of their comfort zone. I submit everyone who is a progressive is going to have to pray more, reflect more, talk lovingly with others who disagree more, and organize more if we're going to get to where we want to go.
Fantastic. All right. Wow. So last question. Your book coming out on the JFK assassination. Can you let us know exactly when that's coming out and give us some detail about what it reveals? Do you have the identity of the guy on the grassy knoll? Or?
No, and I think it was a conspiracy and a cover-up. Still working with my editor. We're hoping to get it out in May or June. Do we have time for a very quick story on this?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Been on this longer than I thought. It's been 25 years writing it. I looked at how the media was co-opted by the CIA, the FBI, and how they gave the Warren Commission story on things. Day after the assassination, we know from declassified tapes that J. Edgar Hoover is talking to Johnson, and he's telling Johnson, we know that somebody who was identified as Lee Harvey Oswald going to the Cuban embassy in Mexico City, we know that the pictures were not of Oswald. And the voice on the tape of somebody talking to the Cuban embassy was not Oswald's voice.
Wow.
They knew that the day after the assassination. I think they figured they needed to shut down the investigation, because the source of the information was the CIA. Subsequently, I have been to a number of conferences, talked to people on this. I've also talked to the head of the House Select Committee on Assassinations that reworked the Warren Commission. His name was Richardson Pryor. I talked to him in 1990, and in a lengthy conversation with him, he said his committee needed 6 more months. They needed $10 million more, that the CIA lied to his committee, and the military should not have destroyed their files on the assassination. He was a very frustrated man. Fast forward years ago, I'm in Washington at a conference from the Assassination Archives Research Center. In comes the chief counsel for the House Select Committee on Assassinations, Robert Blakey, law professor at Notre Dame. Blakey said bluntly, the CIA lied to his committee and he didn't trust anything that they said. And I thought this would be news, because now I've heard the head of the committee and the chief counsel point the finger at the CIA. So I think there's plenty there. I think 54 years later, to have files that are still classified is not in national security interest. The CIA has a lot of files that need to be declassified. The military destroyed a lot of their files. And after Kennedy was killed, we widened the war in Vietnam. We stopped prosecuting the mafia. We stopped moving toward a test ban treaty with the Soviet Union. We stopped funding the Alliance for Progress in Latin America. There were huge changes in foreign policy after Kennedy was killed. Kennedy was no saint, but after the Cuban Missile Crisis, he was pushing for some sort of change with the Soviet Union. And I think we need to get to the root of it, because a country that doesn't know its history is bound to repeat the problems of the past. Kennedy was arguing for, in Eastern Europe in 1962, for a free flow of information. He's trying to inspire people of Eastern Europe. He said, a nation that's afraid to judge truth and falsehood in an open market is a nation that's afraid of its people. And I see that in our country today. So I'm glad to have worked on it, and I'm delighted to have a chance to talk with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Hyman. So can you remind us when your book is coming out?
Should be the end of spring, May or June. Burying the Lead is the name of the book.
Burying the Lead. Well, everyone look for that on the shelves of your bookstores, wherever you purchase books, and hopefully it won't be censored by the media too hard. We've been talking with Professor Hyman. He is running again for South Carolina's 7th District House seat. If you're interested in looking up more on him, his campaign website is www.malhyman.com. That's MALHYMAN, all one word, .com. On Facebook, he's at Mal for Congress. That's Mal, the number 4 Congress. And Twitter and Instagram are also Mal, number 4 Congress. Professor Hyman, thank you so much for being with us on Actify Chat.
Thanks, Matt. I really appreciate it. Good talking to you.
You too.